All right, so chapter 10 deals with sales contracts, and specifically we're going to talk a lot about the Realtor version of the North Carolina purchase contract. Remember, just like the agency contracts that we talked about in chapter 9, the Real Estate Commission doesn't publish forms, right? Is everybody clear on that? So if you see anything on a test that references, like the commission-approved sales contract or the commission-approved listing agreement, that's just wrong, because that's not the Real Estate Commission's function. Who does provide that function in a lot of cases? The Association of Realtors. And so in this chapter, we're going to talk extensively about the Realtors version of a contract that they've made available for use in North Carolina. And here's the reason, just like the reason we teach the Realtor version of the listing agreement or the Realtor version of the buyer agency agreement is because it's the most commonly used one. Same thing applies for the sales contract. The reason we teach the Realtor version of the sales contract is because it's the most likely one you're going to see used. I mean, when you get out there in the real world, the vast majority of your transactions, especially resale transactions, now it's not used very often. The Realtor contracts are not used very often in new construction. Most builders have their own contract. Because think about it, who do you have to have draft a contract for you? An attorney. The reason most transactions use the Realtor contracts is because neither the seller nor the buyer want to spend the money to pay an attorney to have them draft a special one for them when they've got free ones available for their use. Does that make sense? Is there a type of seller who probably doesn't mind spending the extra money to pay somebody to draft a contract for their use in the transaction? What kind of seller would that be? A builder. A builder. And why do you think they would prefer to pay an attorney to draft a contract to be used in their transactions rather than use one that's freely available that their agent already has access to? He who writes the contract makes the rules, right? So is it beneficial to that builder to pay an attorney to draft a contract specifically for that builder's use in their transactions? You think that would benefit them? Absolutely. And that's exactly why they do it. They do it because it is a huge benefit to them to do it. They do it because it helps them tremendously in the transaction to have their contract be the one that's going to be used. Is everybody okay with that? I mean, and so in new construction, you can very often expect to find not the standardized contract, not the Realtor version of the form, but one that the builder's attorney has drafted. Should that make you a little bit suspicious of that contract? Absolutely. So if you're representing a buyer who's buying a new construction home, you probably need to ask for a copy of that builder's contract before your buyer decides to make a call on that thing, and look through it and see what kind of gotchas there might be in there. Things like non-refundable deposits and, some builder contracts, you'd be shocked. People are shocked all the time to realize there's no guarantee in there about when the builder will finish the house. But you know what there are guarantees about? You better close when they're ready. It's very common to see a builder contract that says when the house is ready, if the buyer's not ready to close, we're going to fine you $500 a day for every day you're not ready to close. Very common. But and then in the next paragraph will say, but if the builder has a delay, the buyer's got to suck it up and deal with it. Whether that delay is 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. I've had people contract to build a house and move in 6 months after they were supposed to. And you know what penalty there was for the builder for that? Nothing. And you know why? Because it was their contract. So the structure of the contract makes a big difference. Yeah, Josh?
If I'm able to get, because I have some friends that are builders, if I'm able to get one of their contracts, can I bring it in and make copies?
Sure, we could talk about the things, and we could show like how that might differ from the standardized version of the contract as far as being back. Because the idea of this version, this standardized version, is when the Association of Realtors wrote this, they tried to balance the contract between the buyer and the seller. They tried to be equally fair in treatment to the buyer and the seller. If the builder has hired an attorney to draft a contract, especially for their use, do you think they said, now be real fair about it? Or do you think they told the attorney, stick it to them in every way you possibly can? That's exactly what they did. And I don't blame them. If you're paying an attorney thousands of dollars to draft a contract for you, you want it to favor you. Does that make sense? So it's just it's about understanding that the contract is going to create whatever balance there is in the transaction between the buyer and the seller. It all comes from how that contract is structured. So let's talk about the sales contract itself. This is the document that outlines all of the details of the transaction. What does the buyer owe the seller? What does the seller owe the buyer? It's not just about the purchase price. It's going to outline a bunch of other things other than that. Now, just a reminder, and I know we've said it about 100 times already, no drafting allowed. No drafting or writing of contract language for you. You guys can only do what? Fill in the blanks. That's it. When you look at this contract that I passed out, it's got a lot of blanks. That's the extent of your ability to complete a contract. Yes, you can help a buyer complete a contract by filling in the blanks, but what you can't do is write language for the buyer. If the buyer doesn't like, or the seller doesn't like the language that's on this pre-printed form, don't use this pre-printed form, but that means you're going to be stuck having to hire who? An attorney to draft 140. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So with the contracts, we have to remind you again, the commission doesn't generate this. It's not a commission form. It comes from the Association of Realtors. We're going to refer to it as the 2T form, or a 2-T form. I'll tell you where that comes from. Look down at the bottom right-hand corner of that form. First of all, everybody see the Realtor logo on the left, right? They tell you pretty clearly who that form belongs to. So therefore, who can it be used by? Realtors. If there's not a realtor involved in the transaction, folks, you can't use this form. Yes, sir?
A realtor is a member of
the Association of Realtors. That's exactly right. So that's somebody who's paid to be a member. Here's the way to think about it. All realtors are licensed real estate brokers, but not all licensed real estate brokers are realtors. Does that make sense? You can't join the Association of Realtors unless you already have a real estate license. But you can get a real estate license and not join the Association of Realtors. Is that everybody kind of making that connection there?
We can't, if you're not a member, you can't use this form.
Perfect. If you're not a member, you can't use this form. Now, that's not to say you might not be involved in a transaction that uses that form, because could you be a non-realtor representing a buyer and the house is listed by a realtor and still use these forms in the transaction? Absolutely, as long as it was the realtor who was providing the forms. You know, what the Association of Realtors says is that to use their forms, at least one realtor has to be involved in the transaction, and they have to be the one providing the forms. Now, in most cases, it's going to be both brokers involved that are realtors, in most cases, because most of them are going to be members of the same MLS, and remember, who owns the MLS is the Association of Realtors. Yes, ma'am?
Do most firms require you to be a member?
Yes, most firms do require you to be a member of the Association of Realtors, and here's why. They don't have a choice. Most realtor associations have very strict rules, like for example, that say if your firm is a member of our association, then every licensee who hangs their license with your firm also has to be a member. So like for example, that is the rule with the Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors. Like for example, my firm, Trav Talks LLC, is a member of the Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors. Now my mother has no earthly desire to be a member of the Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors. She lives at Lake Gaston. She's not going to be buying, showing, selling houses up here in Raleigh. But because she is affiliated with my firm, she has to be a member of the Raleigh Regional Association. Now, I pay for it for her. You know, I just have my credit card on file and I pay for it. But she is required to be a member because they have a rule that says if they find out I have somebody affiliated with my firm that's not a member, they'll kick the whole firm out. So yeah, yes, that's generally going to be the case. So it's going to be very hard to affiliate yourself with a firm that is a realtor firm unless you also become a realtor. That makes sense for everybody? I mean,
We wouldn't have access to the MLS pretty much without that, correct?
you would not have access to the MLS, and so they do it to, here's what they understand. There are going to be plenty of people who have a real estate license who don't actually do anything with it. You know, that get their license, hang it, don't really do anything with it. What they don't want is for those people to be able to affiliate with a realtor firm. They want to basically shun them into the nether regions because they know if they affiliate with a realtor firm, they're going to get some benefits that really come from the Realtor Association, even though they're not paying for them. You know, like for example, access to the forms. Because if your whole firm's using the forms, you're going to have access to them and you're going to use them. Even if they tell you not to, you're going to do it, right? And so that's why they have those rules in place to basically say, if the firm's a member, then everybody associated with the firm is a member. Yes, sir. Got a question? Oh, I thought so. Okay. Everybody good on the difference between the Association of Realtors and the Real Estate Commission? Good. So, when we talk about what has to be on a sales contract, these rules come from the Real Estate Commission. The Real Estate Commission says they don't draft documents, they don't write the form for you, but they do write the rules. Remember when we talked about agency contracts, we said there had to be certain things. There had to be, what kind of a date on an agency contract? An expiration date. We said there had to be a non-discrimination clause, right? Those rules come from the Real Estate Commission, and the same thing is true of the sales contract. One of the first things is the statute of frauds. The sales contract has to be what? In writing. If you don't have a sales contract in writing in North Carolina, it's not enforceable. Simple as that. It's got to be in writing in order to be enforceable. So when we talk about any sales contract, we haven't gotten to the specifics of this one yet, but when we talk about any sales contract, yesterday we mentioned this idea of offer and acceptance, and we're going to talk a lot more about that here and expand it out. We said acceptance is what? What is acceptance? Signing by who? By which party? The offeree. When the offeree signs, because the offeror is already signed, right? They signed when they made the offer. So the offeree is the second person to sign. Does that make sense for everybody? So when the offeree signs, that is acceptance. But are we under contract? No, we're not under contract until we do what with that acceptance? Until we communicate it somehow to the other side of the transaction. So like for example, if you think of this aisle as like the division between the buyer side and the seller side. And so you have Bud and Christine over here, and they are on the seller side of the transaction. And everybody else is over here on the buyer side, because it doesn't have to be balanced, right? Could the buyer have hired a firm of 100 agents? Sure. And the seller hires a firm of 1 agent. It doesn't have to be balanced. Does that make sense? But you still have a seller side, and you have a what? A buyer side. Selling side, and what? Listing side. Good. I'm glad when people point that out to me, right? Make sure you got to know the terminology. So we got the selling side, we got the listing side. Communication of acceptance has to cross over this divide, this division between the two sides has to happen. Here's the thing to understand about communication of acceptance. It doesn't matter who we communicate with on either side as long as the communication itself crosses the boundary. Does that make sense? See, in the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter which one of you is the seller and which one of you is the listing broker, because everybody on this side is the same person. In the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter which one of you is the buyer and which one of you is the selling broker and which ones of you are just other brokers affiliated with a firm. Because if you're on this side, you're all the same person. That's the way the law works. So when you talk about communicating acceptance, what you're saying is that when the so let's work out with an offer. Let's say that the buyer is Omar, okay, and the seller is Christine, all right? Now, Omar's hired Keller Williams Real Estate to represent him. Keller Williams Real Estate got a bunch of agents. All of you all over here are the selling brokers, selling agents. Does that make sense? Because he's hired the whole firm. Now, he's specifically only working with Teresa. Teresa's the one that's been showing him property. Teresa's the one who signed the buyer agency agreement. But it's not just Teresa that represents him, it's who? The whole firm. Everybody over here represents Omar. So they've completed an offer to purchase Christine's property. Now, Christine has hired a one-man show, Bud's Real Estate, Inc., to be her representatives. So this is the listing side, right? You have nobody over here except Christine and the listing broker, which is the whole listing firm. So Teresa completes the offer, and Omar, the buyer, signs it. That's the first signature, right? That's the offer or signing. Teresa emails that offer over to Bud. So we've crossed the divide how many times? Once. It's got to go back to have a contract. Does that make sense? So we've crossed the divide one time. Bud presents the offer to his client, Christine. She looks it over, and they talk. Is he going to give her advice about whether or not she should accept it or how she should respond?
Terrible.
It's terrible. She takes it anyway. She accepts it anyway. So she does what with it? What does she accept? I mean, she does what? She signs it. So the offeree has now signed it, but we're not yet under contract. And here's the thing you have to understand about that. If I were to pick up that document, would it look like a contract?
Yes.
Yes, because how many signatures would be on it? Two. I would look at it. I mean, it's initialed, it's signed by everybody. Man, it must be a contract. But the truth is, it's not legally binding yet. It's not yet legally binding because we have not done what with it? We haven't communicated it to the other side of the transaction. Here's what you need to understand about that communication of acceptance. It doesn't matter how Bud chooses to communicate it. It doesn't matter what he chooses to use as the vehicle. Could he use a telephone? Yes. Could he use a fax machine? Email? Text message? Right? Somebody asked me, could you use Snapchat? I said, here would be my problem with Snapchat.
It disappears.
It disappears, right? Like, isn't that, I don't use Snapchat, but my whole understanding of Snapchat is you send something and in 10 seconds it's poof, it just goes away, right? Even though we know everything on the internet never really goes away. Somebody in some warehouse in California's got it, but you don't have it anymore, right? I wouldn't use something like that because you've got to keep your transaction records, but any of the others would be fine. Email would work, text message, fax would work. Person to person, could he personally deliver it back? And here's the thing, communication of acceptance doesn't mean he actually even physically has to deliver the signature back to the other side. All he's got to do is somehow communicate to somebody on this side that the contract has been what? Signed or accepted, which is the same thing. Does that make sense for everybody? So Bud picks up the phone and he calls you Chon. Now, what did I say you Chon had to do with the transaction? Nothing. She's just another agent who works at the same firm. And he calls you Chon because he knows her. They were in a class together. They took a CE class together. And Yu-Chan answers the phone and she goes, and he says, hey, Yu-Chan, you remember me? We were in that class last week together. And she said, yeah. What are you calling me for, stalker? You know? And he goes, well, I wanted to let you know my client has accepted your client's offer. And she's like, what do you mean, crazy? I don't have a client. Because you know what she's going to say in the real world? But does she have a client? Even if she doesn't know it, does she have a client? Yes, because she's affiliated with the selling firm. Does that make sense? So here's the thing. Does Omar, the person, the buyer, have any knowledge that that contract's been accepted? No, it's still binding. Because it becomes binding the moment we cross that divide back over to that side. Does that make sense for everybody? And that's what you have to be very aware of on a test. is when has it crossed back over? Now, I change it up. Let's say Christine actually takes Bud advice. Bud said this is a lowball offer. I would counter offer them. I would counter offer them. Can she do that? Yes. Who is she now? Is she the offeror or the offeree? She's the offeror. So when Bud emails that counteroffer back to Teresa, that's not coming across for the second time. That's coming across for the what? For the first time, because we've swapped the roles. Does that make sense for everybody? We can't communicate acceptance until we accept it with no changes whatsoever. Because what happens is, she may sign that thing. And so you look at it, it's got two signatures, but she made a what? She made a change. The change has the legal effect of erasing Omar's signature from it. Because what he's going to have to do is put his signature beside the change now. He's got to come back and that's not, he can't accept it until he signs for the change. Does that make sense for everybody? Because I'm just trying to give you the practical outcome. Because the practical outcome is when Bud sends this thing back across with the counteroffer, if you look at the last page, how many signatures are you going to see? You're going to see two. You're going to see two because Omar's did what when he first made the offer? He signed it. And then when Christine counteroffered, she went to the purchase price on page 1. She put one line through the purchase price and she wrote a different number in there. She initialed that and dated that change, and then she signed it. So if you look at the contract, you would see two sets of signatures. But it's still just a what? It's just an offer. It's not even an acceptance. It's just an offer. And here's how you know. Because if you were to look at that change, how many signatures would be on that change? Just one. The change only has one signature. That means that has never been accepted by the other. You see what I'm saying? It's got to be accepted unchanged, completely. In a perfect world, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't put a line through it and write a new number in. We would just do what? We would draft a clean one and send it back across so there'd only be one set of signatures. But we don't live in a perfect world. That's not the way it happens a lot of times. He's showing her this on the hood of his car in the driveway, and he just hands her a pen. She puts one line through it. She makes a change. She initials it, and he sends it back. I don't care if it's got two sets of signatures. It's an offer because there was a change made.
So that goes back and forth enough times that it's just bleeding red and all this. Is that you redraft its novation?
Correct.
Okay.
At some point, somebody finally goes, what the F do we have here? Because we've got so many back and forth changes. Let's just start over from scratch and replace it with a clean agreement. What would that be called? That's a novation.
So the contract needs to be, or excuse me, does it need to be clearly legible, readable, and understandable by like an unaffiliated third party?
Yes, an unaffiliated third party would be located at the Wake County Courthouse, a judge, aka a judge. Yes, yes, and that's why it's always dangerous. It is legally acceptable to put a line through something, make a change, have somebody initial and date that change.
Right.
Legally acceptable and a good idea are two different things. What I would always recommend is when you've got your final terms that everybody's in agreement with, regenerate, type it up, clean, and let everybody put their signatures on that way, because that way there becomes no debate about what was intended by all these changes. Especially when you counter price. How many times do you think price gets counter-offered sometimes back and forth? A lot. You might have 4 changes just in that one section of it, and so then it becomes like, well, what is the price? You know, and so it becomes confusing, okay, from a practical standpoint. Do we understand this idea of communication of acceptance? Feel pretty good about that right now? Now, that is going to be really important to understand on a test, because a lot of the questions about the sales contract are going to be based around when we have communication of acceptance. Remember that offers are take it or leave it. Any change is a counteroffer. Even the most minute change is a counteroffer. So I always have been one to sort of caution people against making very tiny changes. Because essentially what you're doing is giving the other party the right to do what? To back out, to change their mind. You know, if I'm on the seller side and we get an offer in and we're okay with the purchase price, we're okay with the earnest money, The only thing we want to change is, well, this closing date is my daughter's birthday, and I'd rather not close on my daughter's birthday. I'm like, figure it out. Figure it out. Because we're not going to make them a counteroffer for that, because for all we know, they're sitting over there thinking, man, I really did the wrong thing. I shouldn't have made that offer. And they're just waiting for some excuse to do what? To back out. So we send it back and say, well, we're great with everything. We accept your client's offer, except we need to change the closing date. So we just change that by a day. If you'll get that initial and sent back to us, we'll be good to go. And then Teresa calls me back and says, well, my buyer's changed his mind. And I feel like the world's biggest moron. Because we should have just done what? We should have just accepted what we had. Don't worry about it. Figure it out. You know? How long does the closing take? An hour? You know, deal with it. Take it to Busch Gardens the next day. You know? Whatever it happens to be. You see what I mean? So there's always some danger in counteroffering. Now, obviously, if you're far apart, you have to counteroffer. But if it's something you can deal with, consider just accepting it as it is. All right? Now, we already talked about acceptance being the signature of the offeree without any changes being made. And we already said that a counteroffer is any change. The key to a counteroffer is to always remember it wipes the slate clean. It clears the board. A counteroffer kills any previous offer that's been made. You can't go back, and they love to try to test you on this on the test. You can't go back and sort of retroactively say, oh, I didn't mean it, I accept your previous offer. Once you made a counteroffer, what have you done to that previous offer? You killed it. Because here's what somebody will want to do. If Teresa brings us that offer, and I present it, or Bud presents it to his client, Christine, and the only thing she changes is that closing date, and then he sends it back to Teresa, and Teresa says, my client's changed their mind. Here's, when Bud gives Christine that news, you know what she's going to say, right? She's going to say, oh, okay, well, I'm fine with that original date. And she's going to want to try to sign that thing now all of a sudden and take that original date. It doesn't work that way, because when she made that counteroffer, what did she do to that original offer? She killed it. She terminated it. She shot it dead. He tried to tell you. Yeah, most of us are. As we said, any method of communication works. There is no rule that says it has to be a certain method. There's no rule that says it has to be in the same way they communicated to you. Just because you got the offer via email doesn't mean you have to send the communication of acceptance back via email. Any method works. In-person works. Fax works. Telephone works. All of them are good. The key point on this slide is it says communication to someone's agent is the same as communication to them. Yes, ma'am.
So it has to be to an agent.
And who is the agent?
The firm. Well, I mean, if you say you know, because referencing Keller Williams again, you know, they have teams, so you might call the team office and get an admin. You know, and so you don't necessarily know if they're licensed or not.
Doesn't matter if they're licensed or not, which is an interesting point, because if they're an employee of the firm, which is what they would have to be,
right.
They are the firm, and the firm is, so you still have communicated with the firm, therefore you've communicated with the principal.
Communication with the firm, not necessarily an agent.
Correct. Anybody affiliated with the firm, whether they be employee or broker affiliate, anybody affiliated with the firm would work. Good question. Yes, sir.
So the way I understand it is, okay, we're at the hood of the car, signed, done, we're done. I'm going on vacation, I'm so damn excited, I'm going to town, see later. Oh shit, I'm driving, my phone's dead, I don't know what to do with my phone, I stopped at the custom postal, I send it to the stamp man.
Or you're driving by Keller Williams on the way out of town. They got a night drop box out there in front of the office.
But that's 30 miles in the other direction.
But I'm saying, if you happen, either one works, right? If you happen to be driving back, could you just drop it in the night drop box?
Sure, but until it's postmarked, you're running the risk of them rescinding the offer.
Well, and so let's talk about that, because the postmark brings us to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the mailbox rule. Okay. The mailbox rule.
As long as it gets to that address.
The thing is, as long as it makes it to them, it's communicated. And here's the most interesting part of that. It doesn't matter if the client has actually been communicated to. It just matters that somebody on that side has been communicated. Are you with me on that? Just that somebody, this whole time, nobody's actually talked about poor Omar. He has no idea he's buying a house yet. I mean, because we've talked to everybody and their brother except him. But we formed a contract
That's a good
because,
point. He may be getting very frustrated and be like, this is taking a lot longer than I thought. Let's
and he may call Teresa. So let's follow it out. Bud calls Yuchan, and Yuchan's like, okay, right? Because she doesn't know who this buyer is. And so she figures, well, I'm just going to let the broker in charge know and let them deal with it, right? So an hour later, Omar calls his agent, Teresa, the one he's working with, and says, it's ridiculous. We haven't heard anything back. Terminate my offer, right? And so Teresa's, of course, going to call Bud and say, we want to pull the offer off the table. And what's Bud going to say?
I called Yuchan an hour ago.
We're under contract. I called your office. I called Yuchan. And Teresa's like, who the hell is Yuchan? Because if you're in a big firm, isn't that likely to be your response? Right? And Bud said, well, she's in your office. And I called her an hour ago and let her know the contract was accepted. Is that still a binding contract? It is, because the communication went to somebody on the other side. Now, I am not advising that as a way to handle this. Obviously, the best way to handle it would be go directly back to Teresa, because she's got the direct line of communication to that client, which is ultimately where the information needs to get, is to the client. But just to show you how all that matters is the sides here. Anybody on this side, and anybody. So could Christine communicate directly to anybody on the other side? Sure. It's one person on this side communicating with one person on this side, and it doesn't matter who those people are. Any mixture works. Now, there are various methods of communication. This one presents the biggest headache. And the reason is because of speed or lack thereof. See, remember, in all of this discussion, I said it didn't matter if Omar has actually been told that he was under contract. It just mattered that somebody on this side had been told. Does that make sense? I can go one step further than that. It doesn't even matter if anybody on this side knows. It just matters that they've been told. Is there a difference between being told something and knowing it? Could somebody send you, for example, a text message that you haven't yet read? Would that count? It would. That would count. If somebody sent you a text message and you had not read that thing, that would absolutely count as communication of acceptance. Same thing is true of an email. If Bud sends an email back to Teresa, and maybe she's out on the lake, she didn't have phone service that day, saying, we've accepted your offer. And then when she finally comes in from the lake, first thing she does is gets a call from Omar, and he says, well, I want to terminate my offer. Well, he can't do it because communication of acceptance has already happened. Even though she hasn't read the email, the communication has happened. Does that make sense for everybody? So it's not about when it's received, it's about when it's what? When it's sent. It's about when it's sent. Well, see, I find that that's pretty easy to understand with email, but harder to understand with this. Is this an acceptable method of communication?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And it works the exact same way. It's not about when this type of communication is received, it's about when it's what? When it is sent. The mailbox rule has been around for a long time. And what it simply says is that if you are mailing communication of acceptance, it only applies when you're mailing acceptance, okay? So it doesn't matter if I'm mailing an offer, if I'm mailing anything, if I'm mailing whatever, a check, none of that matters. It only matters if I'm mailing communication of acceptance. So my client is the offeree, they have signed this offer, and I am mailing it back to the other side. That's when the mailbox rule kicks in. Is everybody with me on that? It doesn't matter when the mail physically gets there. It's under contract from the moment you drop it in that box. That's what the mailbox rule says. It's under contract from the moment you put it into the possession of the Postal Service. If you're mailing it from your house, when would that be? When do you put it in possession of the Postal Service? When you put it in the box and flip the flag up, it's under contract. from that moment. Now, I know you like to go to the next logical conclusion. Who's gonna know? How do you prove that? That's not for you to worry about. That's for a court of law to figure out. Now, I will tell you in practical purposes, and to your point earlier, what do you think a court of law is going to use as a probably the best possible time to indicate when this thing went under contract? The postmark. They're going to look at the postmark. Because as soon as it gets to a post office, what are they going to do with it? They're going to stamp it, and it's going to have a time stamp. And so, it's going to be deemed under contract the minute that postmark hits it. Does that make sense for everybody? It might be 3, 4, 5 days later before the other side actually gets that communication. In the meantime, could Omar have changed his mind about buying this house? Sure. And so his agent Teresa calls Bud to say, by the way, my client's offer's off the table. Bud's gone on vacation. So she leaves him a voicemail. Now you want to talk about the nightmare scenario here. Bud's gone out of town on vacation. Teresa calls him to say, we terminated our offer because we're making an offer on another property. And they do. And they go under contract on it. And the next day, what shows up in the mail? That letter with that acceptance in it. Are you under contract on it? Yeah, now how many are you under contract on? Good luck with that. So, what I would say to you is, in a modern world, is this a good way of communicating acceptance? No, not at all. For that very reason. For that very reason. I'm not saying don't use the mail. I'm saying don't use it as the only means of communication. Could you mail it and at the same time call and say, I have dropped the contract in the mail. We're under contract. Because then at least the other side would have knowledge of what the hell is going on. Does that make sense for everybody? But you need to understand the mailbox rule there. Everybody good with that? Now, here's the thing about getting a mailbox rule question right on the test. Now that you understand the rule, let's talk about how the question is going to be posed. You're going to get so tied up when that thing is mailed, you're not going to pay attention to who's mailing it and to who they are mailing it to. For it to be communication of acceptance, it has to be somebody on this side mailing it to someone where? On the other side. Here's the kind of question they're going to give you on the test, because I know they're evil, I know how they work. They're going to say, Teresa has helped her client, Omar, write up an offer on Bud's listing at 123 Main Street in Garner. Teresa submits the offer to Bud, who presents the offer to his client, Christine. Christine takes a couple days to think about the offer. Meanwhile, Bud has left town for vacation. Batteries. Yeah, I lost the batteries. Hold that thought.
I'm still on vacation.
He's on vacation. Apparently I am too, because the batteries are dead.
I'll figure it out.
I should have known I had to change them for the bus.
Got any questions? Call Trav.
Normally I wouldn't care, but the video doesn't cut very well. Called tech. There we go. So, just to recap, Teresa has sent Bud this offer. Bud has presented it to his seller client. And she said, I need to think about it for a couple of days. In the meantime, he's gone out of town. Everybody good with that? She eventually Christine decides she will accept the offer. So she signs it without making any changes. And she drops it in the mail back to Bud. At what point in time do we have a valid, binding, legal contract?
We don't.
What's the answer to that question?
We don't, because I get to send it to him.
We don't. Who's she sending it to? Herself. Because everybody over here is the same person, right? See, the mailbox rule doesn't apply there, because for the mailbox rule to apply, she would have to be mailing it to somebody where? On the other side of the transaction. You see why you have to be careful with that? She has to be mailing it to somebody on the other side of the transaction, not somebody on her side of the transaction. So you have to be super careful with that on the test. Is everybody with me on that? Yes, ma'am. Right. Christine mailed it to Bud, which is the same as her mailing it to who? Herself. Because Bud is her what? Her agent.
I think I missed some part.
Here's what I said. I said, Teresa has helped her buyer client Omar prepare an offer to purchase Bud's listing at 123 Main Street in Garner. So what side is Teresa on?
Offer or.
Okay. Buyer, seller.
She's the buyer?
Buyer. So what do we call that? What side of the transaction? Testing you now.
Okay. Selling?
The selling side. Good. Okay. She's presented the offer or sent the offer over to what side of the transaction?
Buyer.
Mm-mm. You said she was on the buyer side.
Selling.
No, you said she was on the selling side. See, you gotta get, so see, and that's exactly the problem. You don't have a problem with acceptance. You have a problem with vocabulary about listing, selling. And that's why I'm testing you on it, because I can see it in your eyes. You got to nail, and that's nothing but making flashcards for yourself. You gotta make flashcards for yourself. You gotta say, today on the way home, I'm going to say, listing, seller, listing, seller, listing, seller, listing, seller, listing, seller, listing, seller, the entire way home. And then tomorrow on the way here, well, you're not coming here tomorrow, but next is, when you drive to the grocery store tomorrow, you're going to say what?
Listing, seller.
No, now you're going to do the other side. You got that one now. What are you going to say for the other side?
Buyer, seller.
No.
No, wait.
See?
Listing, seller.
Yeah,
Then I have the buyer, selling.
yeah. So you're going to say over and over, buyer, selling, buyer, selling, buyer, selling, buyer, selling, to the point where you literally can't think about one of those words without thinking about the other one, right? It has to be an instant association, because that's what they do to you on a test. It's not a matter of not knowing the material. It's a matter of you get the words jumbled up and you have no idea what side you're talking about. The sides are important. Yeah? You got to know that word. Selling means who? Buyer. Buyer selling. Buyer selling. Buyer selling. Buyer selling. It's literally, it's just a over and over and over. So it's an instant association. I'm not trying to pick on you. You know that, right?
No.
Yeah,
We all have the same problem.
everybody has the same problem. I mean, hell, I teach it and I had the same problem for a long time because it's silly vocabulary, but you have to get it. So Teresa has prepared an offer for her buyer client Omar, and on Bud's listing at 123 Main Street in Garner. Okay, so Teresa's on what side of the transaction?
On the selling.
Selling side, and Bud's on the what?
Listing.
Perfect. Okay, so she emails the offer to Bud. Bud presents it to his client, and who would his client be? But who is she? Name her.
The buyer.
No. No. You told me this was the selling side, and the selling side represents who?
The selling side.
The selling side is the selling side, but who does it represent?
Buyer.
There you go. So you can't have the buyer be over here and over there. Doesn't make any sense. I'm starting again because I'm not getting off of this until you get it right.
All right.
Okay? So, Teresa is preparing an offer on behalf of her buyer client for Bud's listing at 123 Main Street in Garner. What side is Teresa on?
She's on the selling side.
She's on the selling side, so she represents who?
The buyer.
The buyer. She sends the offer over to Bud. Bud presents the offer to his client. Who is his client?
The first two are mine.
He's on the listing side.
So who's his client?
So I'm the listing
Who does the listing side represent?
Buyer.
No.
seller.
Who does the listing side represent?
The seller.
Yes, see, that's what I'm telling you. You can't, we're talking about the wrong stuff for you because you have refused. In all this time you spent in this class, you refused to learn those two stupid words. And you know what? Those two stupid words will fail this exam for you. That's how important that terminology is. Because you can't possibly answer any of these questions correctly if you don't know that the selling side is who?
The listing side.
No, the selling side is not the listing side.
Buying.
No, there's no such thing as a buying side. Buyer. The selling side is the buyers. And I have to beat it. It's like a drill instructor, right? I realize it's torture, but you have to get it. You have to. Yes, ma'am, Kathy.
I can't remember if Leslie taught us this or he may have taught us this, but when we talked about this in the last class, she, or maybe you did, I don't know, for some reason I think she did, wrote like on the board, like you know how like in the commission trees you have, you know, your selling and then, oh sorry, listing and then, yeah.
Selling.
So like then whenever you're, you know, in a long question like this on a quiz or on the test.
Make a chart.
Like just make 2 categories and
Yep.
say, like put people's names and then like draw arrows and then that way like once you.
That's me. That's me. And I'm getting there. But right now we have a vocabulary deficiency. You know, that tool only works when we get the vocabulary established, right? See, here's the problem for you. You don't want to put people on teams. For some reason, you just want them all running around naked together, whatever, and the hell goes on. This is a fortified wall between these two people. You have to instantly start sorting them into sides. You need to, everything about your life from now on needs to be sides. Take a side, pick a side. It's either the seller side or who?
Buyer.
The buyer side. Pick a side. As soon as I start talking about people, you need to be filtering them to a side. They're on one side or the other. Okay? So, Teresa is preparing an offer on behalf of her buyer client to purchase 123 Main Street in Garner, which is Bud's listing. Which side is Teresa on?
This is on the selling side.
Selling side. So who does she represent?
She is representing the buyer.
There we go. Okay? So, she sends the offer. She emails the offer over to Bud. Bud presents the offer to his client. Who is his client?
She is the buyer. She is the, not the buyer.
Here's the thing. How can that possibly be?
She's the seller.
She is who?
The seller of this home that I listed.
She's selling it.
Yeah, she is the seller.
Seller. Okay.
She is the seller. Here's the thing. It doesn't make sense what you're telling me because you literally will say it right on this side every time and then you tell me the same damn person's on the other side. They're not twins. They're on one side and I'm going to start it over. I told you I'm going to do it to you. Teresa's preparing an offer on behalf of her buyer client Omar to purchase 123 Main Street in Garner. What side is Teresa on?
She's the selling side.
And who does she represent?
Buyer.
Remember that. She's on what side?
Buyer.
And the buyer side?
The buyer.
You sure she's on the buyer side?
On the buyer
And who's the buyer?
The Teresa.
No, she is the agent. Who's the
Okay.
buyer?
Omar.
Omar's the buyer. You
Yes.
got everybody filled out, all right?
Yes.
She sends the offer to the listing agent, Bud. He presents the offer to his client. Who is his client?
The seller.
Woo-wee! We have had a breakthrough. Christine reviews the offer
Yes.
and says that she needs a couple days to think about it. Bud, meanwhile, goes on vacation. With me so far? Christine, after a couple days of deliberation, decides she does want to accept the offer. She signs it, accepts it, and drops it in the mail back to Bud.
But I have no
At what
idea.
point in time do we have a binding contract?
She hasn't yet.
You see how easy it was to answer that question? You know why it was easy? Because you finally put people on sides. That's the key. And that's why I kept going at you about it. Because you've got to get to the point where you're dividing people in sides. So that brings us to Catherine's point, and this is what I recommend you do. When you get these kind of questions, I want you to make yourself like a little chart, like a little flow chart, right? And it doesn't even have to be a chart. Just put a line down the middle of the page. Buyer or seller? Seller, buyer. I don't care who you put on what side, right? If you want to do it like the commission tree, on the commission tree, who's on the left? The listing side, so it's seller, right? So give me the people who are on the seller side in my little example there.
Seller and listing.
And so Christine, right?
Christine.
How do you spell your name, Christine?
CHRISTIN.
Okay, the traditional spelling, right? Okay. And who else was on the listing side? Who else? Bud. Who was on the selling side? Omar and Teresa, right? Is that right?
Yes.
So here's what Catherine is saying, and I think it's the best way to do this. You have a contract when that arrow goes both directions, right? So, Teresa helps Omar prepare an offer. Right? And then she sends it where?
To Bud.
To Bud. What did Bud do with it?
Christine.
He presents it to Christine. She thought about it for a couple days, and what'd she do with it?
Give it back to Bud.
She sent it back to Bud. When do we have a contract?
When it goes to the other side.
We don't, because it hasn't done what? It hasn't crossed that divide. Again. We cooking now?
Okay.
Good.
Yes.
If I got you past that hump, then it was worth it. See, and realistically, I'm telling you, that vocabulary is worth probably 5 questions on the exam, at least. If you have any doubt about that vocabulary, you have to fix it. That's how important it is, because if you can't get people on the correct side, you can't answer agency-based questions correctly. Even if you know the material, you can't.
If it's a dual agency?
Well, that's a great question. Christina asked a wonderful question, so let's talk about that. Christina's question is, what if it's dual agency? It's all the same, right? If it's dual agency, when are we under contract?
As soon as I tell him I accept.
As soon as you mailed it to him. Because he also represents who?
So,
He also represents the buyer, the selling side. There's no division between the buyer and the seller when it's dual agency. Does that make sense? So as soon as any broker knows, we're under contract. As soon as anybody affiliated with the firm knows, we're under contract. Because presumably, when Christine tells Bud, does Omar know? Yeah, because Bud represents Omar.
not everybody in this room
Is a dual
is
agent. Same pot.
There is no.
There's no division. No division whatsoever. Make sense? Now, designated dual agency would be exactly like exclusive agency. You put the wall back, right? Because the whole idea of designated is you're building the wall in the firm. You would just treat those two people like they were in separate firms.
So when they have designated dual agency, it has to cross the line?
It has to cross the line. In designated dual agency, it has to cross the line just like in exclusive agency. Here's the difference between exclusive agency and designated dual agency. If I gave you that same example, but as designated dual agency, so I'll read it. I'll go through it again. Okay. Teresa prepares an offer for her buyer client at 123 Main Street. Teresa's a broker affiliate of Keller Williams Elite. Okay. She has shown a property that's also listed by Keller Williams Elite, Agent Bud, 123 Main Street in Garner. She sends the offer to purchase 123 Main Street to Bud. So far, we don't know it's designated dual agency. We just know it's what?
The same firm.
Dual agency with the same firm. We cannot assume it's designated dual agency. You have to be told it's designated dual agency. Bud receives the offer and is free to advise his seller client on what to do with the offer. What did I just tell you right there? I just told you it was designated because I said he's free to do what? Advise. Because the only way it can be dual agency and he's free to advise is if it is what? Designated dual agency. He's free to advise his seller client about the merits of the offer. Christine takes a couple days to think about it. She finally accepts it, signs it, drops it in the mail back to Bud. At what time did we have a valid and binding contract? What's the answer going to be? We don't, right? We don't, because the only way we can have a valid binding contract is to communicate back to the buyer's side. And who is the buyer's side at that point? Not anybody over here, but just who? Just Teresa. Just that designated broker. Because everybody else is neutral in the transaction. Does that make sense? Okay?
But in the question, when they said, I could advise.
That tells you it's
that would be
designated.
the key to,
Designated.
oh, that's what you mean, right?
You don't ever assume designated dual agency in a question. Never. If all you know is it's two different brokers that work for the same firm, what kind of agency is it? It's dual. And all the brokers represent both the clients. You have to be told that it's designated. How would you feel about that? About this whole idea of communication of acceptance. You're going to see several test questions about it. It's an important idea. They're going to want to know, when are we under contract? When is that? And so again, as Catherine said, make your chart. Make a division between. So let's do another one. And I'll let y'all draw it as I say it. Okay? Well, go ahead and tell you, it's going to be a communication of acceptance question, so go ahead and draw your line. You're going to put people on teams. Josh is a provisional broker affiliate of Howard Perry Walston Real Estate. Josh has been working with buyer client Catherine for the last couple months, and they have executed a written buyer agency agreement. Josh helps Catherine prepare an offer to purchase 555 Oak Street in Clayton, which is listed by Bo of Keller Williams Realty. Bo presents the offer to his seller client, Trudy. Trudy changes the sales price, initials the change, and sends it back to Bo. Bo subsequently sends the adjusted offer back to Josh, who presents it to the buyer, Catherine. Catherine signs for the change, accepting it. Josh calls Bo and informs him of the acceptance. The following morning, Josh emails Bo a signed copy of the contract. At what point in time was a binding contract formed? And before you answer, I'm going to give you what the answer choices are going to be. None. No contract. When Josh called Bo, when Josh emailed, signed, acceptance to Bo for not enough info. Talk to me. What's the answer? Number what? 2. Number 2. Because the way I laid it out, I said Josh was on whose side of the transaction? He's on the buyer side, right? And he's affiliated with what firm? HPW. So they're also on the buyer side, right? And who's the buyer? Catherine, right? So that's, everybody agree that's the selling side of the transaction. What do we know about the listing side? We know who's over there. Bo, Trudy, and Keller Williams, right? Isn't that pretty much what the transaction looks like, mapped out right there? Okay? And what we said was, Catherine sat down and they created an offer with Josh, and then Josh did what with it? Josh sent it to Bo, and Bo did what? Sent it to Trudy, and then what happened? Trudy made a change, and guess what? I have to stop right there.
Because I'm thinking that.
What happens when Trudy makes that change?
Starts all over again.
Starts all over again. Every single arrow goes away. Because now we have a what? A counteroffer, which is just a new offer. Does that make sense? So Trudy makes a change and does what with it? Sends it to Bo. What does Bo do? Sends it to Josh. What does Josh do? Sends it to Catherine. What does she do with it? She signed it and she sent it back to Josh, right? And then Josh did what? He called Bo. Boom. Right there. Arrow that way. Arrow that way. We got a contract. Does that make sense for everybody?
We had acceptance when Catherine, Josh, Catherine sent back to Josh, we had acceptance.
That's acceptance, but we don't have a contract until we have communication of acceptance. Communication of acceptance. Is everybody following on that, along on that path?
So when did the email part come in?
I said the next day,
Oh, okay.
Josh emailed the signed contract back to Bo, which is just fluff, right? They're throwing that in there to throw you off because you're like, oh, okay, we were under contract when he mailed that thing. No, it's not necessary because we were already under contract, right? We're under contract when we have any communication of acceptance.
They have a question on there like, when is acceptance? And then you could say, when Catherine.
I've never seen them ask when acceptance is. They pretty much want to know when we're under contract. And here's the reason. Because brokers struggle with this in the real world. In the real world, continuously, we get these fights about, we were under contract. No, we weren't. We hadn't done it. And so the Real Estate Commission gets sick of getting calls about it. So they're testing you on, do you know the exact moment when a contract is formed? When are you under contract? We feel okay about that? A little bit better now? And that is a great tool. Just make a line, make a divide between the two, and as soon as you get a counteroffer, just remember, start over. Now, you might not be able to raise because you're writing with pen or pencil. Can you just start a new list? Right? Just start over. That's the key. Start over and start doing the arrows back and forth. If you don't have a contract, you go both ways across that dividing line. The arrows that are, I don't care if you got 50 arrows that are all on one side, they don't matter, right? That thing can get pinged around 15 different ways. If it's not crossing that boundary, we're not accomplishing anything. It's got to be this way and then back that way with no changes. No changes. All right? So let's talk about the standard offer to purchase and contract, the 2T form, which I passed out earlier. We want to look at that 2T form. And we want to talk about the things that are in it. And so I'm going to have to kind of skip around from slides back to, I'll put the contract up here so you can see where I'm talking about on it. But I want you to have that actual contract handy as we go through this section. Now, here's going to be an important thing for test-taking purposes. It is very important on the test to recognize if you're being asked a contract law question or a question about this contract. Remember, this contract is not the law. It is just a contract. Does that make sense for everybody? But they want you to know the specifics of this contract simply because it's the most common one. It's the most likely one that you're going to use in a residential real estate transaction. Does that make sense for everybody? This one is by far the most common one. Notice what it says here. For use in all resale residential transactions. Not for use in what? New construction or vacant land. That's the first thing you need to know about this version of a contract, this realtor contract. So here's how you're going to know you're talking about a question about this form. It's going to say, on the standard offer to purchase and contract from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. You see that? Are you talking about a generic contract question, or are you talking about what's on this particular one? You're talking about this particular one. So, when you see that, or on the 2-T, on the bottom right down there, see where it says Form 2-T? That's just the form number. But they've got about 100 different forms, so they give them all a number. If you see on the bottom right of that contract down there at the bottom, it says Standard Form 2-T. Does everybody see what I'm talking about down there? It's just the form number. That's all it is. Okay? Don't be intimidated by that. I don't know what that is. Yes, you do. But any contract that they say from the North Carolina Association of Realtors, folks, we're only going to teach you one. So any question that is specific to a certain contract is going to be about this contract. Does that make sense to you guys? There will be generic contract law questions that you will have. Don't confuse the two. Don't try to answer a generic contract law question. Like, for example, a consequential damages question is not going to be about this contract. That's just generic. Do you know what consequential damages are? What are consequential damages? Talked about them yesterday. What are consequential damages? So what are damages, first of all? Tell me what damages are.
Something has received a hurt.
I've been hurt. How? How do I get hurt in a contract?
By the other side.
Somebody does not do something. What is the word for that? What's the fancy contract word for somebody didn't do something they promised to do? They breach. They breach. Somebody has breached the contract and they have harmed me, so they potentially owe me what? Damages. How would I get those damages? By suing them. Okay? So if I was suing them for consequential damages, what kind of damages would I be suing for? Pain and suffering. Woe is me. You have ruined my life. I can't even go outside anymore. If I was suing for compensatory damages, what would I be suing for? What is it? What's compensatory? It's money. It's all money. All damages is money. It doesn't tell me anything. What kind of money?
Like time.
The actual cost. See, you got to be able to draw that line. We just did it yesterday. Just yesterday. You're going to see those as test questions. You got to know the difference between compensatory damages and consequential damages. Compensatory damages, what is the root word? You're being what? You're being compensated for your loss. It cost me this. Here are the receipts. What kind of damages is that? That's compensatory. Oh my God, they've ruined my life. What kind of damage is that? Those are consequential damages. And pain and suffering, right? The stuff you really can't put a number on, but we're going to try. Does that make sense? So with this hog farm stuff that's been in the news lately, are those that $28 million judgment, is that compensatory damages or consequential damages? Consequential, because there's no way you'd be compensating somebody for $28 million worth of damage. You could buy all of Eastern North Carolina for $28 million. There's no way they actually had, and I'm not knocking the suit, I'm just saying to recognize the difference between the two. Does that make sense? Either one of them, you have to go where? To court to get them. So my point in going through all that, number one, was to remind you of something that was important that we talked about yesterday, but number two, to say, you're going to get contract-based questions that have nothing to do with this contract. Because guess what? This contract doesn't use those types of damages. This contract uses liquidated damages. What did we say liquidated damages were? We agree to them in advance so that we don't have to go where? To court. This contract, so if you get a question about damages on the test and it says, which of the following damages would be used on the standard offer to purchase and contract published by the North Carolina Association of Realtors, the answer is going to be what? Liquidated damages. If they say, which of the following damages would be used by a seller who was suing a buyer because the buyer had breached their purchase contract and the seller wanted to be compensated for the emotional stress associated with not selling their house.
Consequential.
Consequential. And I was evil because I used what word in there? Compensated. But what kind of damages are those? Those are consequential damages. There's no way I can turn in a receipt and say my emotional distress cost me this much money. Those are consequential damages. You see the difference there? Everybody good? Okay. I like to do that. Go back and talk about something from the day before to battle you a little bit. So this contract, this 2T, Standard Offer to Purchase and Contract, which is not published by the Real Estate Commission. Who does it come from? The Association of Realtors. by far the most common in a resale residential transaction, not new construction, not vacant land. There are special ones for that. Let me tell you why you wouldn't want to use this in new construction. I'm gonna switch over right now and show you what I mean about why you wouldn't want to use this contract. I gotta find it here. They just rewrote these forms in July. They shuffle things around. It's pretty much the same, but they've shuffled them around. Let me find condition of property here. I'm gonna, rather than just tell you why, I'm gonna show you why you would not want to use this contract. Come on, access to property. Missed it. Oh, there it is. Oh, it's on page 9 of the contract. Buried. Paragraph 11. It says, buyer's obligation to complete this transaction contemplated by this contract shall be contingent upon the property being in substantially the same or better condition at closing as on the date of this offer. So it's saying the property is going to be in what condition when you buy it? The same. Why would you not want to use that kind of a contract for new construction? Do you want the house to be the same on the day you close as it is the day you write this contract in a new construction transaction? No. I kind of want them to build the damn house, right? So that's why you wouldn't want to use this in a new, does that make sense? You don't need to know that paragraph for test taking purposes, but I'm just trying to illustrate for you why it's not appropriate for use in a new construction contract. Because you're basically saying they could just sell you a vacant lot. Well, it's in the same condition. That's what the contract says. Be kind of bad. Kind of bad. All right? So, when we talk about this thing, one of the first things that we have to talk about is the due diligence period, or the idea of a due diligence period. Right there on page 1 of the contract, and I will bump over to it in just a second. Where you've got the dollar amounts there on page 1, you'll see several lines where you can fill in the dollar amounts. Everybody see where I'm talking about? The first line is one that people pay the most attention to. What is the first line there? The purchase price. First line is the purchase price. Obviously, people are going to pay attention to that. Here's what I'm going to tell you. The second line might be even more important than the first. What does that second line say? Due diligence what? Fee. I want you to underline, highlight, star that word fee. 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 If I charge you a fee, folks, that's not refundable. Fees are non-refundable. Look at line 3. What does line 3 say? Earnest money what? Deposit. I wonder why they use different words there. Because the earnest money deposit might be what? Refundable. Whereas that due diligence fee is what? Non-refundable. And who does it say it is paid to? Due diligence fee. Payable to who? The seller. And payable to the seller when? Let's talk about what effective date means. That's fancy contract language for the minute we go under contract. So, put that knowledge all together now. This is a non-refundable amount of money paid by who? The buyer to who? The seller when? The instant we go under contract. Now, is that a commitment? You better believe it. That seller's got that money. Period. And that's what you need to understand about this contract. Whose money is that now? The seller's. Whether we buy the house or not, folks, they already got this money in their pocket. From the instant we go under contract, if you use this contract, remember, that is specific to this contract. If you have somebody that says, Well, I don't want to use this due diligence mess. And what do you tell them? We need a different contract. And so who do we have to talk to? An attorney. Because this contract is built around this idea of a due diligence fee. Are you with me on that? And this number is the most important number on the piece of paper, contrary to popular opinion. Purchase price is one thing. We get that. But this due diligence fee is going to control everything about this transaction. Because, folks, it's leverage. I love that word, leverage, right? Power. The bigger this number is, the more power who has in the transaction? The seller. They already got your money. You're going to be asking them for all kinds of stuff. Can you please fix this? And what are they going to say? Nope. Because you did what? You gave them a bunch of money up front. And they know you're not going to what? You're not going to get it back, and you're not going to walk away. Because you've already invested $5,000 in this thing. You see what I mean? If that number's tiny, who has the power in the transaction? The buyer does. Because now, the buyer doesn't have much skin in the game. And when they start making demands of the seller, you fix this, you do that, the seller's like, shit, I kind of have to, because I don't want him to what? I don't want him to walk. You see how this works all of a sudden? The power shifts based on the amount of money on that line right there. Are you following me on that? The whole key is because it's non-refundable. It's paid up front. Now, here's what the buyer's paying for. They're paying for something called a due diligence period. Now, I'm going to show you where this is in the contract, but I want to go through it on the slide right here first, and then I'll show you in the contract so you can see what I mean. The buyer is buying something with this fee. They're paying for something. They're getting something in exchange for this non-refundable amount of money. Here's what they're getting. Time. They're buying time. They're buying time to decide if they actually want to purchase this property or not. Traditionally, is the buyer going to do some inspections and things on the property after they go under contract? Yes. And why are they doing those inspections? Because they need to know what they're buying, right? Let the buyer be aware. I need to figure out what the heck I'm walking into here. Is that a good reason to inspect? Does it stand to reason that they might find something and go, no, I'm not buying this house? Yes, that's what they're buying. With this due diligence fee, they're buying the right to do what? Not just investigate, but walk away. They're buying the right to walk away. And they're buying the right to walk away without penalty. Now, some people would argue there is a penalty to walking away because they've already paid this non-refundable money. Does that make sense for everybody? But here's the thing. What they actually bought was what? The time. They got what they paid for. They got the time. And that's all they paid for was the time. And that's why it's called a fee. Because all you're buying is time. Now let's talk about how it works in conjunction with that other number down there. Look at line 3. It's right below it. You got purchase price, you got due diligence fee, and what does the next line say? Earnest money what? Deposit. So let's talk about that word deposit. Deposit means potentially what? Refundable. Here's how these two numbers play together. And this is, if you understand this, you'll be able to answer almost any question about this contract. That's how important this idea is. I said you were buying what with your due diligence fee? Time. You're buying time for your earnest money to be refundable. So what I mean is, whatever amount of time you get for a due diligence period, your earnest money is refundable during that period of time. So you decide you don't want to buy, what happens? You get your earnest money back. Now you don't get the due diligence fee back, but you get what back? The earnest money.
So most of the time the earnest money will be higher than the due diligence?
That stands to reason. And that is mostly the case. Yes, usually the earnest money is substantially more than the due diligence fee would be. But there's gonna come a time when, like every other deposit, does every deposit get placed for a reason? In case you do what? In case you mess up. That's why you put deposits down. In case you, why do you put a tenant security deposit down? In case you trash the place, right? You put deposits down in case you mess up. What is the contractual word for messing up? Breach. Your earnest money is there in case you breach this contract. Here's what a breach of this contract is. There's only one way a buyer can breach this contract. To go past the period of time that they have to walk away and still not close. See, the thing of it is, they got a period of time, the due diligence period, when they can walk away. And if they walk away during that period of time, what's going to happen to their earnest money deposit? They get it refunded. Boom, comes right back. Everybody with me on that? After that period of time, if they don't close, they're in breach. And guess what the penalty for that breach is going to be? The earnest money deposit as liquidated damages. The earnest money deposit will serve as liquidated damages, which means we've already done what? What is liquidated? Liquidated damages means what? Forget this contract. What does liquidated damages mean in general? It's been agreed in advance, and we can't go where? To court. So neither party has the right to sue the other party. So here's what the buyer and seller are saying to each other. The buyer's saying this: I'll pay you right now this amount of money, but I want this amount of time to do what? To change my mind, to have the right to change my mind for any reason. I'm paying you for the time. All you got to do is what? Take the house what? Off the market. I'll write you a check right now. Take it off the market. That's what I'm paying you for, the due diligence fee. Are you with me? Furthermore, I'm going to write another much bigger check, and I'm going to put it in a trust account, an earnest money deposit. And what I'm promising you is I will make a final decision by the end of this period of time. And if I don't make a final decision by the end of that period of time, I am putting that earnest money at risk. Because if I decide after this period of time not to close, then I will also forfeit what? My earnest money over to you as damages because I have breached this contract. But if I make my decision within this period of time, what's going to happen to my earnest money? It's going to be refunded back to me. Is that starting to click a little bit for you? That's the way this contract works. It's the way this contract works. So the due diligence period should be long enough for the buyer to do what? Inspections. How about appraisals? If they need to have an appraisal done. Sure. Survey if they want to have that done. How about they want to have a well inspection done or a septic tank inspection? Should it be a long enough period of time to cover any type of investigations or inspections the buyer wants to have done? Absolutely. To negotiate repairs, any of that. Because here's the thing. Once we go past that due diligence period, can the buyer back out? Past the due diligence period, can the buyer back out? Yeah. At what cost? At their earnest money. That's the thing. It becomes very expensive at that point in time because they will be forfeiting their what? Their earnest money. Deposit.
Is there a minimum or maximum that you put down for the due diligence for the earnest money?
Now you should know by now that we can't talk about those kinds of things because everything is what? Negotiable.
I was just thinking,
It's going to be ultimately what the other side's willing to accept. If I'm on the buyer side, what's the perfect due diligence fee? Zero. If I'm on the seller side, what's the perfect due diligence fee? The whole purchase price. The negotiation is going to be somewhere in the middle. Right? I mean, it's just the simple truth of it. Obviously, if you're on the buyer side, you're going to be advocating for as low of a due diligence fee as possible. If you're on the seller side, you're going to be advocating for as high one as possible. And it's going to be a negotiation. I will tell you, the negotiation around due diligence fee in our market right now is actually much more intense than the negotiation around price. These buyers are paying way over list price on these things. You know, it's not hard to get a buyer to go up on price. They're like, I have $20,000 over the list price, whatever, that's fine. The fight is over the due diligence fee. Because some of these sellers, it ain't nothing for a seller to want $10,000 now for a due diligence fee. You think about that. They want a $10,000 check just to do what? Take it off the market for 3 weeks, a month. Now let me ask you a logical question. Let's say I put a $10,000 due diligence down and a $20,000 earnest money deposit. And I got 3 weeks for a due diligence period. Is everybody with me on that? Now I investigate, I do my inspections, and I find that both HVAC systems are dead. There's 2 HVAC systems and they're both dead. And so I asked the seller, can you replace these prior to closing? And they say what? No. Now, here's the buyer's situation. Can they terminate that contract? Yes, and if they do, they will get what back? Their $20,000 earnest money deposit. But who's going to keep their $10,000? The seller is. So the buyer's choice is, well, I can just give $10,000 away and have to go find another house to buy, or I can buy this house
Put $10,000
and put an HVAC systems in it. That's a damned if you do, damned if you don't choice right there, right? The one advantage to staying in this contract is that at least my 10 grand is going to count toward the purchase price, because that's what I haven't mentioned yet. All of that money counts toward the purchase price. The due diligence fee counts toward the purchase price. The earnest money deposit counts toward. So technically, if I'm paying $300,000 for the house and I paid a $10,000 due diligence fee and a $20,000 earnest money deposit, how much do I owe when we get to closing? $270. That's exactly the way that page looks. Look at that page 1 of the contract. Notice it totals, and then at the bottom line it says balance due at closing, right? So the balance due at closing is going to be the top line number, the purchase price, minus all those other numbers. That's going to be the balance that that buyer owes at closing. Yes, sir.
When is the liquidated damages agreed on?
As soon as you go under contract, it's part of the initial negotiation. That's why it's right there on that line. So you're going to fill in an earnest money deposit as part of the offer. And remember, the earnest money is the liquidated damages. Right?
You're saying some of the brokers will, well, we're not under contract, so we can get to
Because we haven't gotten the check yet. You're under contract the moment you have communication of acceptance. Is everybody good so far with that? Okay. Do we understand this idea of a due diligence period? Yes, ma'am, Christina.
You see number 7, it says building deposit. That's for new construction homes.
I'm sorry?
Number 7.
Number 7 does say building deposit.
Yes, that's for new construction.
That would be if you were selling someone a home that had never been occupied. You would not want to use this for a pre-build home. If the house was already finished, you could use this contract, and you might use it as a building deposit. The blunt truth, though, is you're very unlikely to use any lines on there other than purchase price, due diligence fee, and earnest money. Okay? Now, notice you got 2 different lines for earnest money. You got initial earnest money and additional earnest money. The initial earnest money is due basically at the time the contract's formed. If you want to make the earnest money due at a later time, you can do it as additional earnest money, because there's a date. If you look on there, there's a date that you can fill in when you would want to make the earnest money due. So that's just really, again, all this is negotiable. It's not going to be one side choosing. It's going to be a negotiation. If you're the seller, when do you want the earnest money paid? Right now. Right now. Of course. I mean, even though I don't have it right now, I'd rather it be sitting in the trust account. Does that make sense for everybody? Yes, sir.
So you might do something like that, okay, my buyer, we put down $5,000 for earnest money. Well, he's got $2,000 he can write a check for.
Right.
The additional 3, I got to sell some stocks.
Right, or I got to get it out of my IRA, and it's going to take 2 weeks. So we would do $2,000 as initial earnest money, and then $3,000 as additional, and fill in the date that we would pay the additional. Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the two combined would be the earnest money deposit, the total. Everybody okay so far on that? Understand this idea of a due diligence fee and a due diligence period and how it relates to the earnest money. So what's the best way to describe the earnest money? Refundable when? Refundable when?
During due diligence.
During the due diligence period. Non-refundable when? After the due. It is literally that. It's like a switch gets thrown. It is refundable during the due diligence period and non-refundable after the due diligence period. Because after the due diligence period, the buyer is in breach if they don't what? If they don't close. And it's the penalty for the breach, which is called liquidated damages. Because they've agreed to it in advance. Yes?
Is the due, I know you just said this, so I apologize if it's redundant. Is the due diligence period date negotiable during that time?
Look on page 2.
And you may have covered it while I was.
No, I haven't. I haven't. I wanted to get the idea out there first, and then go to page 2. On page 2, note down at the paragraph J. Due diligence period. It says the period beginning on the effective date. And we said the effective date is what? The day we go under contract. So the due diligence period is going to begin as soon as we go under contract, and it's going to extend through 5 p.m. on blank. What are you going to fill in on that line? The end date. And then it has an interesting phrase right there. Time being of the essence with regard to said date. What do we say that phrase means? It means we're serious about this date. We ain't playing around. It means this is a very serious deadline. What that means is that at 4:59 on this date, your earnest money is what? Refundable. At 5:01 on this date, your earnest money is non-refundable. That's what that line means right there.
So a lot of times, you know, various vendors are backed up for weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So you go under contract and you know you want to have all of the proper things done.
Yep.
And you know it's just you can't have your land say surveyed or
can't get an inspection.
Can't get
an appraisal
within this time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Can you negotiate by saying? We can't have it done by this time. However, should something come back,
Teresa, I couldn't get all my inspections done on your house. Would you be willing to give me some more time to get my inspections done? Keep in mind that's more time that I have to terminate this contract and walk away. Would you be willing to give me more time?
No, but I know sometimes I do.
Under no circumstance you'd be willing to give me more time?
Yeah, with some more money.
What's the proper response to that? Sure, we'd be glad to give you an extension. Let's see. That sounds about another $2,000 to me.
Because essentially you're taking your
Property off the market. That's what you're compensating the seller for. You're compensating the seller for the risk they take, because is there some risk to taking your house off the market? The risk is you're missing another buyer, right? And so the idea of the due diligence fee is to compensate the seller for the risk and the time associated with basically pulling their house off the market. So my response to that is always, we're very open to extending your due diligence period. We're also very open to you paying for more time, because you bought a certain amount of time, we gave you that amount of time, you want more, you pay more. Right?
Increasing the due diligence fee.
Correct. We would just negotiate an increase in the due diligence fee.
I think, and I guess it's subjective as well. If it's just maybe an additional day or something, I think that people are more likely. But if it's 2 or 3 weeks,
Well, see, yes and no. I am very, I would admit, I'm a jerk about this. Because here's how I look at it. Think about what you're asking for. You're asking for, because here's what somebody will say to you. Well, my client, they definitely want to buy the house, but they need another week on their due diligence period. What are you really asking for if you're asking for more due diligence time? Time to do what? Time to not buy the house. The two things you just said don't line up. If they definitely want to buy the house, they wouldn't be asking for more time on their due diligence period, would they? Because if they definitely wanted to buy the house, they'd be like, oh, it didn't really matter, because we're going to buy it anyway. You see what I'm saying?
You're waiting on like an inspection, which is something that's gonna take.
Right, and what might they do as a result of that inspection? They might back the hell out, and so if I'm on the seller side, I'm not doing that unless you're compensating me for that time.
Right.
That's my advice.
That makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in line J, this time period, if it's not met, obviously they're not gonna get their money back, but wouldn't that be like a breach? Considered a breach?
What do you mean if it's not met?
Or,
It can't be met, because what all it is, see, yes, you're right, because you're focused on the times of the essence, but here's the thing, that time's gonna roll around, so it's gonna be met, because what changes at that moment? What's the only thing that changes about this contract at that moment?
Turn into a phone.
You don't turn into a pumpkin. The earnest money goes from what? From refundable to non-refundable. So it's basically all on the buyer to make sure they know what they're doing by this date. You see, if I'm on the sellers, I always laugh. If I'm involved in the transaction, because some agents are OCD, man. They do it. I'm not saying it, but I've had listing agents that would call me like on the morning of due diligence. And I'm on the buyer side, right? And they call me and say, just a reminder, today's your due diligence day. That's like saying, just a reminder, you can cancel the contract today. Well, who would you, that's the craziest thing in the world to say if you're on the seller side, right? I don't say jack nothing about a due diligence date if I'm on the seller side. I hope everybody forgets about the damn thing. Now, I will remind them of it the day after. I just had one that expired July 31st. In fact, I was teaching that evening. It was one of the days I had you guys, and then I had the night class, and it was July 31st, and it says it ends at what time? 5 o'clock. Right before I walked into class, I sent a text message to the buyer's agents. I said, FYI, your due diligence just lapsed. Look forward to seeing you at closing. I sure as hell didn't remind them of it ahead of time, because they might be like, oh man, we need to cancel this thing. No, I'm not going to do that. Whose job is it to pay attention to that date? The buyer's side. The buyer's side of the transaction. You with me on that?
yeah, I got you.
Because it's them who's placing their money at risk. And this brings up an interesting thing. The buyer in this type of a contract, because they've paid real money for that time period, here's what the contract says about their right to walk away. It says, and I'm just going to point it out to you, where's the buyer's right to terminate? It's on page 5, if you want a glance of it. Page 5, paragraph 4, and then line F. Buyer's right to terminate. The buyer shall have the right to terminate this contract for any reason or no reason by delivering the seller written notice of the termination during when? The due diligence period, time being of the essence. If buyer timely delivers the termination notice, this contract shall be terminated and the earnest money deposit shall be what? Refunded to the buyer. It makes it very clear. See, this whole contract is designed around not having fights between people. It makes it very clear because we used to have, and we're going to talk about a word later on in this chapter called a contingency. Y'all know what a contingency is? A contingency is in a contract, it's like a get out of jail free card, right? It's like, if this happens, then I can get out. If this doesn't happen, then I can get out. The most common one, for example, would be a finance contingency. What would a finance contingency look like for a buyer? If I don't get a loan, what? Then I get out of this contract. And why would I put the contingency in there? To get my what back? My money back, my earnest money back. So we used to have all these contingencies in the contract. The buyer, they would put down an earnest money deposit, and they didn't have the right to back out like they have now, but they had like 15 different contingencies in there. They have a finance contingency, they have an appraisal contingency, they have this contingency and that contingency, and you had to pay attention to every single one of them. Oh, well, did the property appraise? Because if it didn't, they can back out. Oh, well, how did your inspection go? Because if your inspection didn't go well, then they can back out. Oh, did you get the loan? Because if you didn't get the loan, then they can do what? Back out. And the truth was, there were so many reasons that they could back out, that they could pretty much get out if they wanted to. So guess what we did? We let them. We just made it so that there is no rule about getting out. What does it say they can get out for? What reason?
No reason.
None. Any. I had dinner last night out and it gave me bad gas and that gave me bad dreams and I don't want to buy this house. Is that a reason I can terminate? Yes. My mama looked at the house and said the shrubs were ugly. Is that a reason to terminate?
Yes.
Yes. Or, I'm terminating. Why are you terminating? I'm not saying. Can I do that? Any reason or no reason. But what it does is it makes it very clear that you have a limited amount of time to do that. And that period of time is what? The due diligence period. And it also makes it very clear what the penalty is for not doing it during the due diligence period. What is the penalty going to be if you go past the due diligence period and you still don't close? Your earnest money is forfeit. If you go past that, because it says right here, if you terminate during the due diligence period, what happens with the earnest money? It gets refunded. If you go past the due diligence period and you still don't close, you just forfeited your earnest money as well. That means not only did they get your due diligence fee, but they also got your earnest money deposit as liquidated damages. Do you understand the basic structure of this thing? Okay. That's the idea behind this contract. Now, there's a couple of other things we do need to talk about here. Number one, sometimes people don't do what they promise they're going to do, like delivering money. So at the bottom of page 1, you need to know, and it continues on to page 2. It's right under the balance line on page 1. You see it right down here at the bottom. It says, should the buyer fail to deliver either the due diligence fees, everybody see where I am? Should the buyer fail to deliver either the due diligence fee or the earnest money deposit by their due date, or should any check or other funds paid by the buyer be dishonored for any reason, the buyer shall, and I'll go over to the next page, have 1 banking day after written notice to deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer to the payee. In the event buyer does not timely deliver the required funds, seller shall have the right to terminate this contract. So if you were asked on a test, what happens if the buyer doesn't deliver their due diligence fee? What's your answer going to be? The seller has to give them what? 1 banking day notice. So the seller, that's what I'm saying. They have to give them written notice and then give them 1 banking day to fix the problem. The seller can't just say, you didn't deliver your due diligence fee, we're not under contract. You have to give written notice and then give them 1 banking day to provide that. Now that's not the law. Don't confuse anything in this contract with the law. That is just what this contract says. Just 1. 1. If they don't deliver the funds. Everybody okay with that? Okay. So anytime they haven't delivered money when they're supposed to, you give them written notice and they have 1 banking day to make it good. And notice it doesn't give personal check as an option in that one. So basically, if you have had to give them written notice and say, hey, you haven't paid what you're supposed to pay, then now they have to do it via cash or wire transfer or certified check. Venmo, Cash Out, PayPal. People are paying due diligence fees with Venmo now. Yeah? Venmo. Cash Out, PayPal, it's all the same thing, right? Think of it. Due diligence fee paid by who? To who? Seller. What's the easiest way for them to do it? Electronically, right? Take me out of the middle. I don't want to handle your check. If it's paid directly from the buyer to the seller, let them pay each other directly. That's what technology's for, right? All I need to see is print me out some proof that it happened and I'll put it in your transaction file. Because here's the thing, if you touch it, you're responsible for it. Let them do it. You're already going to have to be handling one of these checks. Which one are you going to have to handle? The earnest money. Where's it most likely headed? Whose trust though? What's the most likely destination? That's not the most likely. It could be there, but that's not the most likely. Which firm? Seller's firm. The listing firm is the most likely place for an earnest money deposit to be held. The listing firm, still the most likely place for an earnest money deposit to be held. Now, that's also negotiable. If you scroll down on page 2, look right above that blue box right there. It says escrow agent. Insert name. This is who's going to hold the earnest money. That's a negotiable thing. Now I'm going to tell you something about license law right here. It's in this blue box. It's not blue on your page because you just got black and white, but it's blue on the screen up here. That blue box has some really important information about escrow accounts in North Carolina, and that's part of license law. A real estate firm who is holding an earnest money deposit doesn't get to choose what to do with that earnest money deposit. Now, what does the contract say happens with the earnest money if the contract is terminated during the due diligence period? So the buyer is terminated during the due diligence period. What does the contract say should happen with the earnest money? Refunded where? Back to the buyer. Is everybody with me on that? That is not what the listing firm does with it if they're holding it in their trust account. Because the listing firm needs both parties to agree with what to do with it. We're not allowed to release money from our trust account unless both parties are in agreement what we do with it. So we need the buyer and the seller to sign off on releasing that money back to the buyer. Does that make sense for everybody? And so you have to understand, here's the reason why that seems to be two different things. It's not. The contract is between what two parties? The buyer and the seller. So basically what you would tell your seller, if you represented the seller and you were holding that earnest money deposit, if you represented that seller and you're holding that earnest money deposit in your trust account and the buyer terminates during the due diligence period, what advice are you going to give to your client, the seller, about the earnest money? You're going to say, here's what the contract says. It is what? Refund. Not only is it refundable, it says right here, if they terminate during the due diligence period, what should happen with it? It should be returned to the buyer. If you don't do that, you're in what? Breach of this contract. Now, do we need them to sign to release it?
Yes.
Yes. But are you going to warn them that if they don't sign to release it, they stand to be sued and lose a lot of money in court because they're in breach?
Yes.
Are y'all with me on that? So be careful. If you ever end up managing a trust account, it is not your job to referee. You need both parties to agree with what to do with those funds. Or wait for who to tell you. Yes. The judge. Court of law. So basically what would happen, here's how that would play out. Buyer sends you the termination. Of course they want their what back? They want their earnest money. I take the termination to my seller. I say, okay, the buyer's terminated. We need to refund their earnest money. That's what I'm going to say to them because that's what the contract says, correct? And the seller says, nope, I'm not giving it back to them. I'm going to pull out the contract and I'm going to point them to that paragraph. I'm going to say, it says right here, and you agreed because you signed it, that if they terminated during the due diligence period, you were going to refund their earnest money deposit. And the seller says, nope, not giving it back. I say, we'll tell you one more time. You signed saying that you would refund their earnest money if they terminated during the due diligence period. What are they going to do about it? They're going to sue you. And here's how I know they're going to sue you, because I would sue you. Because it says right here in plain English that you're going to do what? That you're going to refund it. And if they sue you, they're going to win. And not only are they going to get their earnest money back, but they're going to get court costs and attorney's fees. And the whole time that's going on, you won't be able to sell your house to anybody else. Because as soon as they file a lawsuit against you, it's going to place a lien against your property until that lawsuit is settled. So, would you like to rethink releasing this earnest money deposit? You see how that conversation is going to go? Yes, sir.
Does that happen often where the seller doesn't want to?
No, it does not. Because again, when you show them, it just clearly says what they're supposed to be doing. It does not happen often, but it could conceivably happen. Well, and that's exactly my point to them. Like, our whole goal is to sell the house. If this person's clearly not going to buy the house, let's move on from them and move on to the next person. Because if you're going to say, no, we're not releasing their earnest money, then you have to tell them we can't put your house back on the market. So, you know, again, it's very self-defeating.
You would have a
Very unreasonable seller. Very unreasonable seller in
I
that
wouldn't
case.
want to work for them.
Okay, but that's what that box, that's what that note is there. It basically, it says, in the event of a dispute between the seller and the buyer over the earnest money deposit, a licensed real estate broker is required by state law to retain the earnest money deposit in the trust account. It's just warning them that if y'all get into a fight, I can't pick sides if I'm the one holding the money. I need both of you to agree. Everybody good on that? Okay? Let's see what else we need to talk about here. We already talked about the due diligence fee. We already talked about the due diligence period. Look at the settlement date on the bottom of page 2. The settlement date on the bottom of page 2 is missing a phrase that does show up with the due diligence date. What phrase shows up with the due diligence date but does not show up with the settlement date? Time being of the essence is not there for the settlement date. So what does that mean about the settlement date? It could change.
Yeah, it's not that serious.
It's not that serious. That's exactly right. Don't be so serious about this thing. This is just a, you know, what's a date among friends, right? That's the way you should view the settlement date. And notice we don't call it a closing date, because settlement and closing are two different things. Settlement's the day we sit down at the attorney's office and everybody signs the document. When is closing? When the documents are recorded. Theoretically, could those happen on different days? Yeah, especially if you do late in the day. It might not get recorded until, or on a Friday, it might not get recorded until the next business day. But the settlement date does not say time is of the essence. It is therefore open to interpretation. And actually, let's go ahead and talk about that. In this contract, not only is the settlement date not a firm date, and I'm going to have to scroll way down, and you will too. I believe it's paragraph 13. Yep, paragraph 13, which is on page 9. Paragraph 13 deals with a delay in settlement. And it takes them a full paragraph to say this. Either party has 14 days to try to close. It says, if one of the parties is ready to close and the other party is not ready to close, then the delaying party shall give notice and will have up to 14 days after the settlement date to try to close the transaction. So not only is the settlement date not written in stone, you shouldn't count on it happening until when? 2 weeks after the scheduled date. Because it says right here that either party has up to 14 days to continue to try to make it happen. That you can't say, you're in breach, I'm canceling this contract until we get to day what? Day 15. 15, you have to wait a full 14 days before you can declare somebody in breach because they're not ready to close.
So is that, well, I know everything is not, different things happen, but is that normal, why it normally takes about 30 days to close?
Well, this is actually saying past that time period. You know, so like if we scheduled a 30-day closing here, we can't count on being closed for 44 days. Because what we're saying is that whatever the closing date is on page 2, add 14 days to that, and that's how long you actually have to get this thing closed. We're going to try to close on that date, but we have up to 14 days after that to make it happen. And there's no penalty for that. People go out of their minds sometimes about this because it's not explained to them in advance. So if you're a buyer, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. If you're a buyer and you go under contract and your closing date is September 15th, are you going to make plans around September 15th? Yes. Like what? Moving. Put all your mess on a truck somewhere, right? And then on September 14th, you get a call from your agent that says, well, I just found out that the sellers haven't moved out of the house yet. What do you mean they haven't moved out of the house? How are we gonna close tomorrow if they haven't moved out of the house? Well, we're not closing tomorrow. Apparently, the movers can't come for another 10 days to get them moved out. So they're pushing closing back till week after next. And I'm sitting there going, what about me? All my mess is on the truck already because I thought we were closing tomorrow. Are you going to be upset as a buyer? So, what advice should a good broker give to either their buyer or seller client when we go into this contract, if we use this contract? Don't count on that date. Don't make firm plans around that date. Make sure your plans are fluid enough that they can be changed up to 14 days. Because that's what this contract says. And if they don't like that, what are they going to have to do? No. If you explain it to them before they go under contract and they don't like it, what are they going to have to do? Don't use this contract. Get an attorney to draft you a different contract. Because if you use this contract, guess what? It's in here. It's in here. You know why it's in here? Because dealing with loans, you just never know, man. When you start dealing with financing, and it used to always be the world's biggest fight because the old contracts that we had didn't have this built in. And so you'd get to close and the lender would say, oh, we need another week to do this. And then you had to beg the seller for an extension, and you had to do all this dancing back and forth. So they just put it in there and said, nope, you got 14 days. Shut up, leave us alone. 14 days. Make sense for everybody? Okay. It really does make it a lot easier when you have delays. And the other thing to remember is those delays work from both sides. That can be either the buyer delaying or the seller delaying. So just plan for it is the best thing I can say. Let's see what else I need to point out here. Talked about the closing date. We talked about delivering funds with 1 day written notice. Over on page 4, you've got the personal property and fixtures section. So fixtures, you would only be listing fixtures that you wanted to what? You wouldn't be listing fixtures you wanted to convey. You'd be listing fixtures you wanted to what? To exclude. Fixtures automatically convey. You only list fixtures if you don't want them to convey. You would list personal property that you wanted to what? Convey. Okay? The rest of page 4 just talks about what should happen during the buyer's due diligence process. We don't need to talk about all that. Basically everything that you want to do to investigate the property. There is an interesting note over on page 5. I love when I see on the MLS, property being sold as is. I'm like, yeah, I pretty much already knew that, because look at what the contract says in paragraph C right there. Paragraph 4, line C on page 5. You see where I'm looking? Repair improvement negotiations. Does everybody see that? Look at what's in all caps right there. The property is being sold what? In its current condition. Doesn't that mean as is?
Right.
Yeah, it is what it says. So isn't pretty much every sale as is? Because pretty much every sale happens using this contract? There you go. We talked about the buyer's right to terminate. If you look over on page 6, something we just talked about in chapter 8, the residential property disclosure statement, or the Residential Property Disclosure Act, we said the buyer has to see the seller's disclosure statement when? Prior to what?
Offer.
Prior to making an offer. Look at these options on the top of page 6 here. It says the buyer, what does the first box say? The buyer has received a copy, right? What does the second box say? The buyer has not, and what's the penalty for them not seeing it? The buyer gets what? 3 days to walk away. Remember that. We talked about that in chapter 8. You're going to be tested on that. That's a North Carolina specific question. The North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. You're going to see a question about it for sure. I am on page 6, up at the top. Remember, with the Residential Property Disclosure Act, the seller is required to give that disclosure statement to the buyer when? No later than what? Than making an offer. And if the buyer has not seen it before they make an offer, then they get what? 3 days to back out with no penalty. What would that mean about this contract? Not only would they get their earnest money back, they would also get what back? Their due diligence fee. They would get everything back. So, if you are a listing broker and you get an offer in and that second box is checked, you better be scrambling to get somebody a disclosure statement. And then say, check the other box. That makes sense? Okay? And same 3 options. And what would exempt somebody? I'm hurt that you would ask that question because we talked about the exemptions to the Residential Property Disclosure Act. What properties are exempt from the Residential Property Disclosure Act? New construction. Vacant land is not exempt. How about foreclosures? Foreclosures are exempt. What other kind of sale, and here's why they're exempt. The person you're buying a house from has no idea about its condition, or there shouldn't be anything to disclose. In the case of new construction, there shouldn't be what? Anything to disclose. In the case of a foreclosure, you're buying it from a bank, they got no idea about its condition. What other seller would have no idea about the condition of the property? An attorney or a trustee who was handling an estate sale. Because the person who would know about the property is what? Dead. So there's nobody to make the disclosure. Those would be your 3 big exemptions right there. So if the property was exempt, you would check that box and you would just put on here, what? New construction, or foreclosure, or estate sale. New construction, estate sales.
Did y'all remember that?
They all remembered except you were the only one.
Yeah, we were all writing it down.
They is smart, they is wonderful. Page 7, we have not yet talked about the environmental hazard chapter yet, but there's something worth noting up here at the top. Top of page 7 there's a box that says the property is residential and was built prior to 1978. And then in parentheses it says attached to lead-based paint hazard disclosure addendum. So anytime a property is residential and built prior to 1978, it might have lead-based paint in it. There's no way to know for sure unless you've actually had the property tested. It is not required that you have the property tested. What's required is that you just notify the buyer or the tenant that the property was built prior to when? 1978, and so therefore it might have lead-based paint. So
Provide them with the standard form 289-T.
there you go. That's exactly right. If the property was built before 1978, you would check that box and you would go find that form and have the seller fill out that form. And here's what the form says. Property is built before 1978. And then ask the seller, do you know of any lead-based hazards? And they say yes or no. And then you give it to the buyer. And you tell the buyer, if you want to know for sure, you can do what? Have it inspected or tested yourself.
Just a formality.
That's right. That's right. Basically, it's just a warning to let them know property's old enough that it could have lead-based paint. Yes, ma'am.
Is there anywhere that talks about the oil tanks that are buried prior to 1973 or?
Not on the contract itself.
Okay.
Yeah, not on the contract. This is there because it's required by federal law. Federal law requires this statement to be on any sales contract regarding lead-based paint specifically.
I thought it had started to be required at some point that they look for those.
Nope.
What about the pipes?
Oh, yeah.
Polybutylene pipes, that's a required disclosure, but it's not required to be on the sales contract. This is required by federal law. This is a federal law that says any sales contract or lease for residential property if that was built before 1978, it has to make the buyer or tenant aware that the property was built before 1978 and could have lead-based paint. Okay? There's a place there to fill in the homeowners association's information. If there are homeowners association and dues, you would fill those in here, and the contact information for the association. The reason the contact information is important is there are often fees associated with changing the account over from the seller to the buyer. So we need to be able to contact the homeowners association and find out how much those fees are so that they can be added to the closing statement. They can be substantial, by the way. Some neighborhoods it's $500 to change it over. To change the homeowners association account from the seller over to the buyer. Okay. Let's see. That's it for that page. Over on page 8, down toward the middle, is a couple of different things. The deed line, this is where you fill in how the deed is going to be made out, who the property is going to be deeded to. Now, most likely, this is going to be the same people that were listed on page 1 as the purchasers of the property. Most likely. It does not have to be though. Think about tenancy by the entirety. Tenancy by the entirety, what's the old expression? It takes what? One to buy and 2 to sell. So on page 1, could one spouse be listed as the purchaser? But on this page, who would have to be listed as how the property is going to be deeded to? Both of them. Both of them. So this page lists how the property is going to be deeded. Coincidentally, this is also where you would indicate what form of concurrent ownership if you have more than one owner and they're not married. Now, if they're married, you don't need to say what form of concurrent ownership because it's going to be what? Tenancy by the entirety. You just say husband and wife and that takes care of it. But if you have an unmarried couple and they want survivorship, what would you put on this line? Joint tenancy with the right of survivorship. So you would put their names, John Smith and Mary Johnson, as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. That's what you would put on the deed line right there. Because this is how you want the deed made out. And then I there just below it, agreement to pay buyer expenses. This is seller paid closing costs. How many of you have ever heard of that? Seller paid closing costs. It's when the seller is paying some portion of the buyer's closing costs. This sometimes happens from time to time. It's a way to help buyers be able to afford to purchase the property because they might have substantial closing costs associated with their loan, for example, and the seller might agree to pay those closing costs, especially if they're having a hard time selling the property. And this would be where that would be done. So you just fill in the dollar amount. Now keep in mind, from the seller's perspective, this number simply reduces their takeaway from the transaction, right? If the purchase price on page 1 is $250,000, but then here it says the seller's paying $5,000 of the buyer's closing costs, then how much is the seller really getting out of the transaction? $245,000, right? Because you just subtract that from it. So when you present an offer to a seller and they're asking for closing costs to be paid, that's how you present it. Right, that's exactly right. You have to look at sales price minus whatever closing costs were, but that's really what they're offering us for the property. Right. In other words, if the buyer wants me to pay their closing costs, they're probably just going to have to add that number to the purchase price. Everybody okay with that?
You said add?
From the buyer's perspective, it's addition. From the seller's perspective, it's subtraction. Because here's the thing, if I'm selling my house for $250,000, some people will bring you an offer and say, we brought you a full price offer. Now look, it says $250,000 on page 1, but then they want us to pay $5,000 in closing costs. Is that a full price offer? No. So if they want to bring me a full price offer and have me pay $5,000 in closing costs, what should it be on page 1? you gotta add it. It should be 255 on page 1 with the 5,000 in seller paid closing costs, because that's a full price offer.
It says under negotiated repairs and improvements
Yep.
that the negotiated repairs shall be made in a good and workmanlike manner, and the buyer will have the right to verify the same prior to settlement,
Yep.
not prior to due diligence.
Prior to settlement.
So you can request all this during the due diligence period,
Mhm.
you can promise it,
Mm-hmm.
and if it comes through after and it's not up to like what you would want as a buyer, it's irrelevant unless you're willing to forfeit.
No, if they've agreed to make the repairs. First of all, if you're persnickety about how the repairs are done, you should specify how the repairs should be done.
Okay.
Don't just say fix the deck.
Mhm.
You know, be specific about how you want the decks fixed. You want it fixed by a licensed general contractor? Do you know, that you be very specific about any repairs that you agree to, number one. Number two, if the seller doesn't make those repairs, then what is the buyer's recourse? Don't what? Don't close. Don't close. That's their only recourse. Don't close until they either make the repairs, or you sue them and force them to make them. Now, of course, most buyers don't want to do that because they don't want to wait.
You have 14 days.
Well, actually, if you have unlimited time because they're the one that's in breach. If they've agreed to make that repair and they're not doing it, they're in breach.
They don't make adequate, attempts to get it done.
Right.
within 14 days.
Then you could sue them and try to, force it that way. But basically what it's saying here is, don't whine about it after closing. If you're gonna ask for repairs, inspect them before closing. Now, I will tell you, I try to stay away from negotiated repairs like the plague, because you're asking for that very thing to happen. Because the seller is gonna try to do the least possible, obviously, and the buyer wants it perfect, and so they're never going to agree on what a satisfactory repair is in most cases. So I go back up to this line and work it from there. If we do an inspection and we find certain repairs need to be made, I'm going to send somebody out and get a price quote on how much those repairs are going to cost, right? And what I would do, rather than asking the seller to make repairs, if we figure out if we've gotten an estimate and the repair is going to cost $1,000, rather than saying to the seller, please fix this, I will just say, don't worry about the repairs, please pay $1,000 of my buyer's closing costs. Because at the end of the day, that saves my buyer the $1,000 at closing, and then they can do what? Take the $1,000 they just saved at closing, pay their person to make the repairs and get them done the way they want them done. That, to me, is much cleaner. And most sellers prefer that because they're trying to move out. Last thing they want to have to deal with is hiring somebody to come find somebody to come fix it, let them in the house, and deal with all that nonsense. So I love a credit. Stick to a credit. Move on with our lives. Take care of it with the dollars. That's pretty much it. Over on page 9, it talks about things that are going to be prorated. You might see that as a test question. What does it mean when we prorate something? We haven't done prorations yet, but what does it mean when we prorate something? We adjust or portion it out between who? So what kinds of things does it say here we would prorate between the buyer and the seller? Taxes. Think about it. Taxes are for the full year, correct? But neither one of these parties has owned the property for the full year. So it's not fair for either of them to pay the full tax bill. I mean, just think of what you would say. If you were selling the house, you'd be like, I'm not paying this year's tax bill. I don't own the damn thing anymore, right? And if you were the buyer come in and be like, well, it ain't fair for me to pay the whole tax bill. I didn't own it from January through August. So what do you think we're going to do with the tax bill? We're going to prorate it. We're going to split it up. So if you ever see a test question about what things this contract specifies will be prorated, well, there they are. Taxes, rent, because if the property's rented, do we need to prorate the rent? Yes. Yeah, and homeowners association dues. Those are the 3 things that are going to be prorated when we close this thing. Taxes, rent, and homeowners association dues. We already talked about the delay paragraph. Over on page 10 is the addenda section. And addenda is just a plural of addendum. An addendum, what are the first three letters? Add. An addendum adds to a contract. So, if you've read through this whole contract and it's missing something, there are a bunch of addenda that are available that might handle that thing. Like, for example, if you were submitting this offer on a property that was already under contract and you just wanted to be in line in case that contract fell through, do you see an addendum on this list that might help you with that? Backup contract addendum. And the backup contract addendum simply says, we recognize you're already under contract. If you accept this, we know we're not under contract, but if something happens with the first one and that buyer walks away, what happens? We automatically go in. And see, I think this is vastly underused. If you're a buyer's agent, and it's very common right now to be in a multiple offer situation, right? And you lose out, you don't get it. A lot of buyer's agents will say this, well, if something happens with that one, just let me know. No, because if something happens with that one, you're going to be right back in the bidding war again, right? You're going to be right back in the position. Why not resubmit your offer as a backup offer? And that way you know if something happens, you automatically fall into place as the primary
It
contract.
doesn't seem like very many buyers would be willing to wait around for that.
You don't have to wait around for it. Why would you have to wait around?
Well, because if the first contract is going through, then you're the backup. So,
Yeah.
but you're a buyer, you're looking to buy a home.
So keep looking.
But you can't make, if you made a offer on another place and it got accepted, now if this one falls through,
What are you gonna? What do you think the backup Would you think the backup contract addendum might make a plan for that very specific instance?
I mean, at this point, I don't know.
It does. It says that the buyer can terminate the backup offer at any time. So you continue. So you continue looking. You find another house. You make an offer on it. It gets accepted. What do you do with the backup contract? You terminate it. Boom, out the door. Wouldn't that be better than having your buyer wait around and Bo call him and say, by the way, the primary contract fell apart and I've already got 16 offers again on the house? Which would you rather be in? I'd rather be right in place.
Top one on the pile.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think, so if you ever want to, if you read through this contract and there's not something there that you want to see addressed, check the list of addenda that's already available. If the house you're buying is a short sale house, which we haven't even talked about, which one do you think you would use? See how smart you are already? It's not rocket science. Yes, sir.
I don't want to waste time with
New construction addendum. We don't recommend, again, that you use this for new construction. However, sometimes people will go and they'll buy like a spec home, right? And the house is 95% completed. So there is an addendum that can be added to this thing that says, okay, this is new construction, and we're going to ignore that part of the contract where it says it's being sold as is. Here are the things that still need to be finished. And it's basically like a place to just list what the improvements are going to be.
That's not the best way.
Not the best way at all. I would not recommend it. Would not recommend
That's
it.
a question of why it's here.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't. I really don't recommend you use it. I always feel like in new construction you need a contract drafted specifically for that purchase. Because there's too much that can go wrong. You know, get too many disputes.
Just add this against that.
All right, everybody good there? Computation days, calendar days. We always use calendar days for anything except delivery of money. We use banking days for obvious reasons because it's money and the banks matter. But when we say 5 days, we mean 5 calendar days. That's all that says. And that's it. Everybody signs it. And then over on page 12, there's a place to list your information. A place to list the listing firm as well as who? The selling firm. And so you would want to put your individual license number. And notice, the selling firm, you have to say how you're acting in the transaction. Are you acting as a buyer's agent, as a seller's agent, or as a what? Dual agent. You have to check one of those boxes. So you have to make it clear whose side you're on when you fill that out. I'll give you one piece of advice. See where it says buyer notice address and buyer email and seller notice address and seller email and all that stuff up there? I put on every one of these lines, contact agent, contact agent, contact agent. Because I'm telling you folks, you put your buyer's email address on here, you know who's going to be the first one to email them? You don't want that happening. They'll make deals on the side that you don't know about. They'll get in fights you have no idea is going on. I don't want anybody contacting my client. I want all that communication to flow through me. So me, when I fill this out, I just leave it all blank and I put contact agent and then I fill in all my information. I want it to go through me. I don't want anybody contacting my client except me. Yes, I'm a control freak, but it works.
It eliminates problems.
It does eliminate problems, big time. That's why I do it. Well, that's right. That's what I'm being paid for, and I can only control what I know about. The worst things that happen in transactions usually revolve around the things I don't know are going on. You know, like, and you don't know they're going on until it's already blown up out of proportion. Whereas if you knew it in advance, you could have dealt with it. And so I try to stay in that loop of communication as much as I possibly can. You know, I'll give you an example. The property that just came out of the due diligence period, it's an estate sale. I represent a brother and sister whose parents, mom passed away a year and a half ago and dad passed away 6 months ago. And so the property's still titled in the name of the parents, but I have two siblings who are selling it up on Lake Aston. And the closing attorney, the buyer's closing attorney contacted me and said, I need the seller's email addresses so I can talk to them about the estate. I said, no, you need to send me your questions and I will converse with the sellers about it. And the closing attorney took exception to that. He said, well, you don't understand the issues. I said, oh, ain't you cute? Probably know more about this shit than you do. Number one. Number two, not your job to tell me what I do or don't know. I am their legal representative. That means the communication flows through me. It matters not whether I know what you're saying, it matters that I'm involved in the communication. Once he understood my position, he understood, and we've moved on and had a productive relationship since. But see, what he wanted to do was bypass me. Here's the problem with that. What if he had told one of them, well, I need you to go to the Halifax County Courthouse and get this document, and they don't do it. And I don't know that conversation happened, and here we get ready to close, and some document that we need, we don't have, because the closing attorney told my client directly, and rather than telling me. See, I want that relayed through me so I can stay on top of it to make sure we get to where we need to be. You follow me on that? I don't ever want to be out of that loop of communication. Okay. That's it for the standard offer to purchase and contract. So that is a good place for our lunch break. We're not done with this chapter. There's still a few more things we need to talk about in this chapter, but it is a good place for a lunch break. So why don't we do that and come back at, as you haven't even had breaks, come back at 12:40, and we'll go from there. Okay?